Hello again, feral friends and fellow nature nerds. Thank you once again for joining me. Today I'm going to tell you about a couple of animals that, well, they have a few things in common, but they're not even remotely related. And for most of us, with the exception being some of my listeners down under, we won't see either of these outside of a zoo. The first is the pangolin, sometimes called a scaly anteater, a native of Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. The second one I mentioned just in passing way back in episode 34, and that's the echidna, also known as a spiny anteater, which may be a little bit more familiar to my handful of listeners in Australia and New Zealand. Now, like I said, these two animals share some common characteristics, including both being called anteaters, but they're completely unrelated. However, they're both incredibly unique, endlessly fascinating, and just a little bit weird. So let's take a closer look at these two weirdos. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, and this is the Dispatches from the Forest podcast. I'll start with the pangolin. There are 6 species of pangolin, 4 in Asia and 2 in Africa. They range in size from a foot to just over 3 feet long, 30 to 100 centimeters. The most obvious physical characteristic of pangolins are their large, hardened, overlapping plate-like scales that cover their bodies, making them look a bit like pine cones. Now, these scales are made of keratin, the same protein that makes up your fingernails. Porcupine quills, hedgehog spines, claws, horn sheaths, and the scales that cover a turtle and armadillo shell are also made of keratin. But the pangolin scales are unique among mammals. An armadillo's scales cover bone, but the pangolins just have skin directly beneath. And despite a superficial resemblance, armadillos and pangolins are also not closely related. Their similar features are a case of what's called convergent evolution. When threatened, pangolins curl up into a ball, a behavior known as volvation. With their overlapping scales acting as armor, they protect their face by tucking it under their tail. This is also usually how they sleep. In addition to acting like armor, the scales are sharp, which just adds an extra layer of defense from predators like pythons, lions, and leopards. And in case that isn't enough to deter a would-be predator, pangolins can also emit a noxious-smelling chemical from glands near their anus, similar to the spray of a skunk. Now, most pangolins are nocturnal, the main exception being the long-tailed pangolin. Some are arboreal, living in hollow trees, but ground-dwelling pangolins can dig tunnels that reach 11 feet, 3.5 meters in depth. They have poor vision, so they rely on hearing and their sense of smell to find prey. So, what's their prey, you ask? Well, pangolins are insectivores. Their short legs and sharp claws are used for climbing, but also for burrowing into ant and termite mounds. Some arboreal species, like the tree pangolin, use their strong prehensile tail to hang from tree branches, so they can strip the bark away from the trunk, exposing insect nests beneath. Pangolins have extremely long, thin tongues covered in sticky saliva, like an anteater's. Large pangolins can extend their tongues as much as 16 inches, 40 centimeters. But despite this resemblance to anteaters, and the common name scaly anteater, recent evidence shows that they're actually more closely related to carnivores, having split from them just under 80 million years ago, rather than related to anteaters. But most of their diet consists of various species of ants and termites, supplemented by other insects, especially insect larvae. But pangolins tend to be kind of picky eaters, and they'll often consume only 1 or 2 species of insect, even when many species are available. But that said, they can eat 5 to 7 ounces, 140 to 200 grams of insects per day. Now, that may not sound like a lot until you consider that on the low end of that range, 5 ounces of termites is about 95,000 individual termites, which makes pangolins an important regulator of termite populations in their natural habitat. But pangolins don't have teeth, so how do they chew their food? Well, the answer is they don't. Instead, when foraging, they ingest small stones known as gastroliths, which accumulate in their stomach and help grind up the ants. This part of their stomach is known as the gizzard and is also covered in keratinous spines, which further aid in grinding up and digesting the pangolin's prey. Now, pangolins are solitary and they meet up only to mate, which typically happens at night after the male and female meet near a watering hole. So, not unlike young adult humans going out to the bar, then, I guess? There's no set mating season for pangolins per se, but pangolins generally mate once a year, usually during the summer or autumn. Now, rather than the males seeking out the females, the males mark their location with urine or feces, and the females come to them. If competition over a female happens, the males will use their tails as clubs to fight for the opportunity to mate with her. So, again, not too different from young adult humans going out to the bar. Gestation periods differ by species, ranging from roughly 70 to 140 days. African pangolins usually give birth to a single offspring at a time, but the Asiatic species may give birth from anywhere from 1 to 3. When they're born, the scales are soft and white, and after several days they harden and darken to resemble those of the adult. During this vulnerable stage, the mother stays with her offspring in the burrow, nursing them and wrapping her body around them if she senses danger. The young cling to their mother's tail as she moves around, although in burrowing species, the young pangolins stay in the burrow for the first 2 to 4 weeks. At about 1 month old, they first leave the burrow, riding on their mother's back. So not unlike possums, which again they're not closely related to. Around 3 months of age, the young begin to eat insects in addition to nursing. At 2 years old, the offspring are sexually mature and they're abandoned by their mother. Now, with this very effective physical defense system, the biggest threat faced by pangolins is, somewhat unsurprisingly, humans. Pangolins are the most trafficked animal in the world. In southern China and Vietnam, they're in high demand because their scales are believed to have medicinal properties in traditional Chinese and Vietnamese medicine. It's estimated that over 100,000 per year are illegally trafficked to these countries. Pangolin meat is also considered a delicacy. Combine that with deforestation, and it means that pangolins are in trouble. All of the species of pangolins are considered to be threatened, and 3 are listed as critically endangered. Conserving pangolins is highly challenging. Due to their reliance on wide-ranging habitats and very particular diets, captive breeding attempts are often unsuccessful. Pangolins also have a decreased immune response, which makes them susceptible to diseases like pneumonia and the development of ulcers in captivity. Pangolins rescued from illegal trade often have an increased risk of being infected with parasites like intestinal worms, again decreasing their chance for successful rehabilitation and reintroduction into the wild. Taiwan is one of the few conservation grounds for pangolins in the world after it enacted the 1989 Wildlife Conservation Act. Wildlife rehabilitation centers became important communities for protecting pangolins and their habitat and has greatly improved their survival. These centers work with local indigenous tribes and police to prevent poaching, trafficking, and smuggling of pangolins, especially to black markets in China. These centers have also helped to reveal causes of death and injury among Taiwan's pangolin population. Today, Taiwan has the highest population density of pangolins in the world. Okay, what do you get if you cross a helicopter with a rhinoceros? Hell if I know. But if you crossed an anteater with a hedgehog, the result would look like an echidna. Echidnas are medium-sized solitary mammals weighing between 10 and 13 pounds, 4.5 to 6 kilograms. They're covered with coarse hair and spines, like a hedgehog. And like hedgehogs, these spines are modified hairs made of, guess what? Keratin, the same stuff that makes up the pangolin scales. Now, don't get me wrong, echidnas are not related to either anteaters or hedgehogs or pangolins or porcupines. What they are related to are platypuses. And like platypuses, Echidnas are monotremes, mammals that lay eggs. There's 4 species of echidna, and they all fall into 2 categories, short-beaked and long-beaked. There's just a single species of short-beaked echidna, and it's found throughout Australia and parts of New Guinea, while the 3 species of long-beaked echidna are only found on New Guinea. In fact, it's thought that echidnas evolved on New Guinea, splitting off from their water-foraging platypus-like ancestor somewhere between 19 and 48 million years ago. At the time, New Guinea was isolated from Australia and its land-dwelling marsupials, which would have been competition for echidnas. In the absence of marsupials, though, echidnas were able to move in and take over this terrestrial niche. And boy, did they become masters of the land. Echidnas have short, strong limbs with large claws, making them powerful diggers. A single echidna can move 7 tons of soil every year. Male echidnas also have spurs on their hind feet, not unlike the platypus. But unlike the platypus, this spur is not venomous. And while the internal reproductive organs differ, both sexes have a cloaca, a single opening for urination, defecation, and mating, like birds or reptiles. Echidnas have elongated, slender snouts that serve as both mouth and nose. Like their platypus cousins, echidnas also have electroreceptors on this proboscis to help them locate prey. But the platypus has 40,000 electroreceptors on its bill, while the long-beaked echidna only has about 2,000, and the short-beaked echidna, which lives in drier environments, has a paltry 400 just on the tip of its snout. Long-beaked echidnas eat worms and insect larvae, which they catch with a tongue covered in tiny sharp spines. Short-beaked echidnas primarily feed on ants and termites, tearing open soft logs or ant hills and licking up the insects with a sticky tongue. But whatever the length of the beak, short or long, echidnas, like pangolins, have no teeth. But unlike pangolins, they don't eat rocks. They break down their food by grinding it between the bottom of their mouth and their tongue. Echidnas have the second lowest active body temperature of all mammals, just behind the platypus, at just 91.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 33 Celsius. This low metabolism and the stress resistance that comes with it means that echidnas are pretty long-lived for their size. The average lifespan for an echidna in the wild is 14 to 16 years. The longest recorded lifespan for a captive echidna is 50 years, and there have been unconfirmed reports of wild individuals reaching 45. But this low body temperature also means that they don't tolerate extreme environmental temperatures very well, so they shelter from harsh weather in caves and rock crevices. They're also found in forests and woodlands, hiding under vegetation, roots, and piles of debris. And they sometimes use the burrows, both abandoned and even currently occupied, of other animals like rabbits or wombats. Individual echidnas tend to have large but overlapping territories. Okay, now it's time for a warning. I'm about to talk about echidna reproduction, which is fascinating, but there is a bit of graphic detail. So if you're a parent and you're listening with children, you might want to preview this next bit first, okay? You've been warned, so let's go. Male echidnas have a 4-headed penis. I warned you. And its shaft is covered in small keratinized spines which are thought to induce ovulation in the female. During mating, the heads on one side, quote-unquote, shut down and don't grow in size, while the other 2 release semen into the female's 2-branched reproductive tract. Every time the echidna engages in copulation, it alternates penis heads in sets of 2. When not in use, the penis, all 4 heads of it, retract inside the cloaca. Now apparently studying echidnas, particularly echidna reproduction, in their natural habitat is quite challenging, and they show no interest in mating while in captivity. I mean, can you blame them? So here's a fun fact. Prior to 2007, no one had ever seen an echidna ejaculate, and attempts to obtain a semen sample by forcing echidnas to ejaculate with electrical stimulation only resulted in the penis swelling. Again, I warned you. Breeding season starts in late June and extends through September. During this time, a female echidna may be followed by a line of up to 10 males, with the youngest male trailing last. Males sometimes get impatient and will switch between lines. 22 days after mating, the female lays a single soft-shelled leathery egg, depositing it directly into a marsupial-like pouch. Now, like platypuses, baby echidnas are called puggles, and they hatch from their leathery egg using a reptilian-like egg tooth after just 10 days gestation. Described as both larval and fetus-like, the puggle sucks milk from the pores of 2 milk patches. Remember, monotremes are mammals, but they don't have teats. Puggles will stay in the pouch for 45 to 55 days, which is about when they start to develop spines. And at about this time, probably because having a spiky baby in your pouch would be super uncomfortable, the mother digs a nursery burrow and deposits the young, and she'll pop in every 5 days or so to suckle it until it's weaned at the age of 7 months. Puggles will stay in their mother's den for up to a year before striking out on their own. Now, echidnas are very timid, and when frightened, they'll attempt to partially bury themselves or curl up into a ball. Again, kind of like a hedgehog or an armadillo. Their strong front arms let them dig in and hold fast against a predator that's attempting to pull them out of this hole. And they have a lot of predators, including feral cats, foxes, domestic dogs, and goannas, which are a large species of lizard. Snakes also pose a threat when they slither into echidna burrows to prey on the spineless young puggles. Many indigenous people in Australia and New Guinea also eat echidna. Now, final fun fact about echidnas, they're featured on the back of Australia's 5-cent coin, and if you're a Sonic the Hedgehog fan, you might already know that the character Knuckles is not a hedgehog, but a short-beaked echidna. And with that little tidbit, we'll bring this episode to a close. If you want to support the podcast, that would be fantastic. Here's some ways to do that. Tell a friend. Listen together, listen separately, and then get together for coffee and discuss, whatever works best for you. Become a patron. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month. And with 3 paid months, you get some sweet Dispatches from the Forest merch. Go to patreon.com/dispatchesfromtheforest to find out all the details. You can make a single donation through PayPal using my email address, dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com. which is also, of course, where you can email me if you have a question, a comment, or a request for a future episode. You can donate using the Cash App and the hashtag ForestNerd. You can also find the merch store at cafepress.com/shop/dispatchesfromtheforest, then click on products and find something you like. Finally, follow Dispatches from the Forest on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. The Dispatches from the Forest podcast is a production of Dispatches from the Forest and may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.